So in some of the previous videos, I've talked about this self dot and how I wasn't going to explain it yet. I think it's time. It's to do with scope in Python. So when I'm talking about scope, I'm talking about how variables exist within functions. For example, I've got this init function here, and everything in here is within this function. Now, if I create a variable in this function, it only lives inside this function. So for example, if I've done this, instead of what I actually did, by the time when I've finished this function and go to a different function, this current speed does not exist anywhere else. It's thrown away. So if I was to have current speed here, I would get an error because it would not know that this is referring to this. They're not the same thing. So what's actually happening is we're making a window object with this line here. And this window object can talk about its own variables. So when we say self dot, we say it's this property that's available all the way through to the object that's been created. An example of not doing this, because we don't need to do it all the time, is here. I've got this any collisions. It's a list because it's all of the collisions that happen between the player sprite and a list of enemies. And I create it here. I check it in the next line to see if there have been any collisions. And then at the end of this function, it's thrown away because I don't need it anywhere else. And then when I come back next time into the update, I recreate that variable. Same with these enemies. This enemy here is created locally here and then is added to self.enemyList, which is available all the way through. So that's a list of each enemy in turn being added in there. So that's an introduction to the idea of where all this self dot comes from. Basically, just remember that if you need to use it in more than just a very local environment, then you've got to put self dot in front. While I'm here, I'm going to talk about one other thing. I'm going to talk about constants. The example I'm using is this 0.5 here, you might remember, is the sprite scaling. And it's 0.5 also here and somewhere else as well. And it basically the sprites are 128 pixels, and that's too big, so I've made them half size. But I'm having to make them half size everywhere, and if I want to change that, I have to change it in at least 3 different places. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a constant, which by convention is in capitals. Sprite scaling equals 0.5, and everywhere I've got that 0.5, I shall replace it. Not that 0.5 because that's a different thing. Actually, I'll look at that in a minute as well. And there. So just check that everything works the same to begin with. Waiting. Looks the same. And now if I change the scaling to say 0.2, so everything's a lot smaller. Although the ground is going to be wrong because I'm not going to have enough blocks. Just fell straight down, but everything has changed its scale. And I can actually use that sprite scaling to fix that blocks problem as well. So where was it? Where am I making those blocks in this init thing here? It's 64 times counter. Now I know they're 128, so I've done 0.5 times 128 to get 64. What I'm going to do is do 128 times sprite scaling. Yep, times sprite scaling, and I'm going to need a lot more than 30 as well. Let's go 100, 1,000, 100. Try that. And yep, the ground looks about right. I need to fix some other things. I'm not going to stick with that. I'm going to go back to 0.5 anyway. And as one more example of using this, I've got this gravity value here. I'm going to use that as a constant and set that up here, keep the same value, but what it means is that if I decide I want to change the gravity in the whole game, I don't have to go scrolling through the whole thing to find the one place where gravity is used, or it might be more than one place. It's right there at the top where I can find it super easily. So that's constants and also an introduction to the idea of self dot.